Hi everyone. So today's webinar is on the plant transpiration system. So plants all need nutrients and they need to be able to take up these nutrients. And firstly, the nutrients come from a product called a soil solution, which is a dilute solution of water that has a range of substances. Now, these substances are nutrients. Some of them could be potassium, nitrate, and phosphorus. Those are all nutrients that a plant needs to be able to grow properly. You obviously, all living organisms need oxygen as well. So you've got that as another nutrient that needs to be taken up, and you've also got water, which is another essential nutrient. Now, the uptake of these nutrients will vary in terms of transport mode. So your potassium, nitrate, and phosphorus are transported via active transport, whereas oxygen and water are via passive processes. Oxygen is through diffusion and water is through osmosis. So the root hairs are the structure of the plant that absorbs all the nutrients from the soil solution. So depending on the type of plant, you'll have a different root system. So there are two main types of root systems. You've got dicotyledons, which have a central root, which is what we call the taproot, which is this root here. And then we've got a branching root system, which is these lateral roots here. And they allow for a large surface area to allow for maximum absorption of solutions or nutrients from the soil solution. The other type of root system is in the other type of plants, which are monocotyledons, and those have a shallow, rather fibrous looking root system, and they tend to be, again, as the name suggests, shallow, but very densely populated in the soil to allow for absorption. So the large surface area of the root system is incredibly important to make sure that efficient and maximum uptake of nutrients occurs in the soil. So the root hairs, which is part of the root system, if this is our root here, the root hair allows for either further increase in surface area because you've got all this area along here, and that then allows for further uptake of nutrients from the soil solution. So we have two structures that are part of a plant that are like the vascular tissue in all plant systems, and those are called the xylem and the phloem. So the xylem is the structure that transports water and other soluble minerals like potassium and phosphorus, for example. And then we've got the phloem, which transports sap. Now, this sap is usually a water-based solution that contains glucose. So if we have a look at the movement of material in the xylem and the phloem, the xylem is only one way and it transports water and any other minerals taken up from the soil solution. Whereas the phloem is a multi-directional transport system and it has water and glucose, which we know is used either for photosynthesis or to then transport that food around the plant after it's been converted through photosynthesis.
How do water and minerals get to the leaves? Although roots can exert a slight upward pressure, it is evaporation of water from leaves, a process called transpiration, that moves water molecules and ions up from the roots. Transpiration exerts a pull that is relayed downward along a string of water molecules from leaf to root. Hydrogen bonds cause water molecules to stick together, a phenomenon called cohesion. As each water molecule evaporates, it pulls on the next water molecule and it pulls on the next. This relays the pull of evaporating water molecules all the way down to the roots. The adhesion of water to walls of the xylem cells helps to keep gravity from pulling the water molecules back down. As each water molecule escapes from the leaf, it pulls a column of water molecules upward. Solutes are transported along with the water. Thus, the plant xylem uses the movement of evaporating water molecules, cohesion, and adhesion to draw water and dissolve minerals from the soil into its roots and upward to its leaves. Hot, dry, windy conditions increase transpiration. If not enough water moves up from the soil to replace the water lost to evaporation, the plant will wilt and it could die. How does a plant prevent excessive water loss? An opening in a leaf is called a stoma. Stomata are generally open during the day to allow carbon dioxide into the leaf, where it is used in photosynthesis. While the stomata are open, water moves out of the leaf by transpiration. This allows the plant to move water and minerals to the leaf, and the evaporation of water also functions to cool the plant. If hot, dry conditions require the plant to conserve water, guard cells close the stomata. This is a trade-off. Although closing the stomata reduces water loss, this also slows down photosynthesis and may cause the plant to overheat.
So all plants will produce waste products, and they have several ways in which they can dispose of those waste products. So they can either store them in dead woody tissue, usually on the inside center part of the trunk of the tree, or they can store them in leaves. Leaves do tend to fall as leaf litter, so they can be disposed of in that way. The same with bark as well, because bark will eventually shed off of a tree and the waste products will be shed with that. Carbon dioxide is usually disposed of through the stomata in the leaves. So plants have been able to have a lot of structures or adapt a lot of structures that allow for water conservation. So there were a couple in the textbook that you've already had a look at. I'm going to talk about some other ones, specifically ones that are based on Australian plants. So the cuticle, as we know, is a waxy layer that prevents water loss through the epidermis. So you can see here water droplets on the waxy surface of the water, and that also means that water can't transport or travel through the other side either. You've got stomata that, for example, in eucalypts, they only open their stomata in the early morning and tend to close them up by mid-morning on a hot day, and that allows for conservation of water and less transpiration. You've got succulents that absorb water from the atmosphere in the early morning when dew forms as a way to allow for better water conservation. You've also got succulents that can absorb salty water, which means that they can actually live in salty soil, which we, as I'm sure you guys know, we have a huge issue with salinity in South Australia. So succulents have been able to adapt to that environment. And when they absorb this salty water, they're actually able to excrete the salt as deposits through their stomata. And that means that they can live in water areas that wouldn't normally, most plants wouldn't be able to live in because they're so salty. So you've also got Australian plants that have changed their shape. So we've got some varieties of Australian pine that have really tiny leaves, and that allows for more water conservation. You've also got some leaves that actually roll their leaves in the hottest part of the day. So here we've got an example of a plant, an Australian plant that actually rolls its leaves closed, and this allows for less exposure of the stomata to the air, which means that transpiration is decreased, meaning you've got more water conservation. Some varieties of eucalypts will hang vertically and edge onto the sun. This means that they're not in direct contact with direct sunlight, which means they reduce the effect of transpiration as well. Tap root length is another adaptation that is seen in a lot of Australian species, particularly in the Mallee area, where the taproot will be a very deep, long taproot because the water table out there tends to be a lot lower. So the roots have to be able to grow further to be able to access that water. And then you've also got a lot of root systems, particularly eucalypt species that have a very extensive root system, and this allows for maximum water to be absorbed, particularly in the Australian environment where we have very small rainfalls. So if you do only have a small rainfall, an extensive root system will allow maximum absorption of water, so that water, a lot of water is contained. or transported into the plant.
In this clip, we're going to talk about translocation. So there are two things here we're going to want to get to grips with before we start. The source is the part of the plant that releases the products of photosynthesis into the phloem. A sink is a location in the plant that removes these products of photosynthesis from the phloem. So, how does sucrose enter the phloem? So this here is the sieve tube elements in your phloem. These here are plasmodesmata. So these are gaps in the cell walls allowing communication and the flow of minerals between the cells. Here is a companion cell, with more plasmodesmata, this time linking the cytoplasms of the sieve tube elements and the companion cells. For decoration, I've added some mitochondria. Using ATP, adenosine triphosphate, H+ ions, or protons, are actively loaded out of the companion cell. This creates a concentration gradient. Now, via facilitated diffusion and with the help of special co-transporter proteins, the hydrogen ions are brought back into the companion cells along with the sucrose. The sucrose is now in the companion cells, along with many mitochondria which generate the ATP to pump out the H+ ions in the first place. From here, the sucrose can diffuse from the companion cells into the sieve tube elements. Now, in the sieve tube element, the sucrose has previously diffused in. The sucrose in the cytoplasm is now a concentrated solution. This makes the water potential more negative. There is now a lower water potential in the sieve tube element. So what this means is by the laws of osmosis, water always moves to the more negative area. Therefore, water moves into the sieve tube element. So now this high load of water being there creates a high hydrostatic pressure. So the sucrose, the assimilates and the water flowing in, that makes this a source. So now the water acts as a medium to transport the assimilates from an area of high hydrostatic pressure to an area of lower hydrostatic pressure. Once it reaches an area of lower hydrostatic pressure, the sucrose, the assimilates, need to be used up by the cells, the surrounding tissues. The sucrose then diffuses from the sieve tube elements to the surrounding tissues. So the movement of sucrose from the sieve tube elements to the cells in the surrounding tissues lowers the water potential in the surrounding tissues. Once again, by the laws of osmosis, water moves to the more negative area, therefore leaving the sieve tube elements to go to the cells and surrounding tissues. As the sucrose and assimilates have been used up here, this makes this location a sink. So, the movement of water and all the assimilates and products of photosynthesis around the plant is known as mass flow. This can occur both up and down the plant, just depending on whatever location the sucrose is needed. So, in a plant, where are the sources and sinks?